And this is on Facebook.
Yep, we're live now. Hey guys, thank you for tuning in today for Kingdom Collaborations. I have my friend Matt Smith here. Matt is a pastor in Lynchburg. He's essentially a church planner, and I believe it's Dayspring Ministries. Do I have that right? Or
Yep,
Dayspring Church?
that's correct.
And so I
Ministry.
asked Matt. Go ahead, sorry, Matt.
No, it's just Dayspring Ministry.
Okay, yep. And so guys, I wanted to bring Matt on specifically and ask you guys to jump on because Matt, for me, and in my experience, I've had a chance to serve in a lot of different churches. I've had a chance to serve under different ministries. And when I first met Matt, I thought he was just outside the box to anything I'd seen. And in many ways, he was. But after walking with him in actually over years now, seeing the process he takes and the approach he brings, what at one time I thought was a little bit different or a little bit outside of what I thought was the way to do it, I realized is probably the better way. And because of that, it has it has blessed my ministry, blessed my family. And so I wanted to talk to him today about discipleship and about the method of or the approach he takes to bringing people into a place of image bearing, or what does it mean to bear the image of Christ, and how does that work in discipleship. And so I'm going to toss the ball at Matt and let him see where he goes. I don't have a plan. We don't have scripture. So wherever he feels to go, we're just going to sort of follow the Lord and see what the Lord has to say today. Okay. Go ahead, Matt. Floor is yours. Discipleship. What's going on with discipleship today? What are some of the best ways to approach it? How do you approach it?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert of anything, but I do what the Lord has told me to do to the best of my ability. And the one thing I wanted to encourage each and every person on is uh, discipleship is critical, and Jesus wants to disciple all of his people, and he made sure that that would be every advantage you could have, and that he put people on this earth and anointed them to do that with him, through him, for him. And so it's a really important process, and you could have multiple influences in your life, but having one person who is you really given permission to, not just with your words but in your heart, to mentor you, to lead you, to guide you, it's critical, and it speeds up your process tremendously. That being said, I kind of like to think of us, each and every one of us, as we're like trees, according to all the symbolic prophecies and everything. We're these
Yeah, we are
trees
the
along
branch,
this river of
so
life.
that fits.
Yeah, you're the branch. There you go.
It's the
And
trees.
every branch, every tree is going to bear fruit. And I like to think that as we bear fruit, and some good, some bad, some bitter, some sweet. Um, when you're being mentored by somebody, you're going to eat that fruit. And so, first and foremost, check the fruit. Make sure they got good fruit in their life. Make sure that that fruit looks a lot like the fruit that Jesus said we're supposed to have. And if you don't have that fruit in your life, or if the person doesn't have that, then be really leery of how much direction you take from them. But if they do, pay way more attention than you think you're supposed to pay attention. Um, Listen to the steps that they give you seriously. I kind of treat it like the best analogy I have, which is, I don't recommend you go back and watch this movie if you've never seen it, but the Karate Kid from the 80s, turns out lots of cursing in the 80s, but um, I call it the Mr. Miyagi approach of, like, this kid Daniel comes to learn this master kung fu, and so he can fight everybody, and he's like, okay, paint my fence. He's like, I didn't come to paint a fence. Okay, paint the fence. And it's just, and he just forces them in this process of learning to paint the fence properly, the best way, the perfect way. And later on, that translates into this masterful skill of fighting. But that's kind of like discipleship in the Lord. I have found is that there's a few critical steps in maturity in Christ and development in Christ, and just how you grow into this fruit bearing Christian, that you're never going to skip. And these are the categories I've kind of broke it down into, that I push people when I feel like they want my leadership. Are you a phenomenal worker? Are you the best worker? Do you shift the atmosphere at your job? Is your employer blessed because you're parked there like the ark at the outside of what's the guy's
Obed
name?
Edom.
What's the house name? Obed Edom. Are you blessing your employer like the ark at Obed Edom's house? Are you serving that guy, whether he's good or bad boss is indifferent? Are you serving him like you should serve God? That's a really critical place in life, because one, I don't care about your boss being blessed. That's going to transform you. It will shape your heart in tremendous ways. Are you blessing? Are you serving your wife and kids if you have them, or your soon-to-be significant other? And if not, just every other person around you. Like, are you serving them like Christ would serve the church? In your community, are you the person who is always ranting and raving? Are you a negative impact on your community or a positive impact on your community? You know, and there's just some. I push people in these social, financial, business, and family life. I push them in these areas, and I know that a lot of people, if they think you can preach or they think you can pastor or whatever, what they're a lot of times in their heart, what they're really saying is, "Hey, how do I do that?" And the answer is, "How's things going at work?" And so I would say back to where we started is like,
Yeah.
if the person has fruit in their life that you want on your tree, then pay way more attention than you think. Because most people just get frustrated, like, oh, all he ever talks about is my work and this and that. And it's a long game. I'm playing a real long game with people, but it's because I'll tell you why I've always known this to be important. But when I first I felt called to be go into full time ministry years before I actually did it. Like I knew that God was preparing me in lots of ways. I'll skip all that, but I studied frantically studying the Bible, the Word, searching for God. I really started to study doctrine more at that time because I wanted to have answers for things, and uh, whether I disagreed or agreed with it. You know what I mean? I thought I was like, I'm going to get all these crazy questions. But when I got down to it, people saw that we had a good marriage and we had a good life, and they wanted counseling. And the questions they always asked it was never the theological bombs that I was hoping for. It was, how do I stop hating my wife? How do I start loving my husband? How come my job is awful? How come I can never get a raise? How come nobody takes me serious? And so are you still there? Did you freeze
I
up?
was, no, I'm there. I'm here. I'm just smiling. I saw that thing sort of fly in, so I was watching you play catch. Matt,
What was
can you not
that?
hear me? Can you hear me, buddy? Matt, did I lose you?
I'm so sorry. Well, you just froze up. I can keep talking.
Go ahead, talk. Go ahead. You're good.
Yeah, so I just noticed that everybody wants to know. You're like, and it really gets down to this. I mean, sure, everybody wants to be able to preach and share the gospel more efficiently. Everybody wants the answers to the big questions. But at the end of the day, if your marriage is awful, if your job is awful, if you're rejected in your community, um, nobody's going to ask you those questions. And like nobody's going to want your influence. You have to get your life in order. You have to be following these basic fundamental commandments of God, or nothing's going to work.
I think that's, first off, can you hear me? Are we still connected now? Or have you lost me?
It's breaking up pretty bad on your end, from my hearing at least.
All right. Well, I'm sorry. I'll see what I can do here, and then I'll sort of pitch the ball back to you, and hopefully you catch some of it. Or have I lost you altogether?
Okay, no,
All right.
we're getting
We'll,
better.
we'll try and see. Sorry, guys, if you're watching and we're losing connection. Could be my fault. I'll take blame for it, and we'll start there. But one of the things that Matt talked about there, if you didn't hear it or you weren't connected or just weren't catching up with us, he talked about discipleship being rooted in how you work, how you do family life, and how things. Oh, I think we're losing Matt. But he talked about how it relates to your work, your family life, and your interaction like in the society or in the culture, right? And so, with that being said, or looking at that idea, discipleship then leaves from this place of, well, I'm gonna how do I get to a place of preaching or ministry or these things? And it's like, no. Go to your work and work hard. Be your best employee. Be the one that they're glad they hired. Earn the right to have influence. And from that place, right? Then when you say, all right, you need to hear about Christ, or you need to hear this, or I want to teach you this truth, it doesn't get lost. I think I got Matt back. We will see. Let me try this
I'm back
here. Do I got you? Can you hear me?
a little
Oh,
bit, yeah.
okay. So what I was doing is I was unpacking some of the things that you had said, Matt, in regards to
Hmm.
in particular that working hard, like actually being good at your job, being faithful, like actually taking the steps necessary. That there's something about discipleship that we don't do that anymore. Discipleship is like take first
Yeah.
principles, learn a Bible class, here's our baptism thing, you're a disciple. And it's like, well, no, like I have found even now, and I've taken this on in our life group, right? So one of the things I learned from you, I have a bunch of young guys, and I'm on them all the time about their attitude at work. Are they serving their
Hmm.
boss? And it's been neat because I've seen a couple people get new jobs. I've seen doors open up for them. I see people that are doing it. Like one of the girls here, she's just being blessed, and her attitude. And what's amazing is she has the best attitude out of all of us. We all know it. She has the best attitude, and shockingly, she's doing phenomenal in the workplace. And
Yeah.
I feel like when you started to challenge me in that, right? And because for me, discipleship was when Matt and I first started hanging out in Brookneal, I was like, we need to get classes, we need to do training, let's teach them the gifts, let's right, because that's how I've been raised, very Pentecostal. Let's get them tongue talking, gift operating. And it's like, yeah, but they suck at work. Like, so now they're going to go speak in tongues at work and only prove to everyone that this stuff doesn't work because they're not good
Yeah.
employees, they don't have good attitudes, and now they're having spiritual experiences with nothing that's rooting them in reality. Um, the other side of it, and this is something I always loved about Matt as well, is I watched Matt like love his kids well. And I know that sounds like, well, everyone says that. Like, yeah, but most of you don't actually watch your pastor. You don't hang out with them privately. You don't get the pre-service, post-service. You don't go to their house. Like I've watched Matt with his boy. I've watched Matt with his boys when they were not being good. Like it wasn't church service time or it was. And I watched him interact. And I watched him interact with his wife. And for me, one of the things I think that um, was the most remarkable is Matt has a strong wife, like a powerful woman, and I watched him not be intimidated by her. I watched him actually love when she would flourish and she would, and I realized that I saw Christ in this. It was like Christ is looking for a bride to be strong and be powerful and step out on her own thing. And he's not threatened by the church arising. He's hoping for it. And I watched Matt with his wife, and it inspired me. Even the season I'm in right now, where Lisa's working, right? And I'm staying home taking the like never in a million years. You 5 years ago, Matt would walk up and said, well, the Lord told me you're gonna be a stay-at-home dad. I'd be like, Matt, the devil is a liar. But the truth, because I watched him do that with his wife, I realized like my wife has this amazing potential. I want to get out of the way. I want to help her. And I realized the discipleship that was going on that I always linked to church service and classes, not into doing life. You want to run with that, Matt? I'll let the ball sort of land back in your hand and you can unpack that however you want. I know we've had some disconnect too, so I realize the conversation's a little jolted.
No, no, I'm good. Yeah, no, that's the main thing. And as John the Beloved said, if we don't have love, we have nothing. So mastering our home life is everything. And as David, you know, one of the real verses, I know everybody uses it, but it impacted my life was David talked about a cup that run over, and it's like, well, we started to make that as a gold standard of when we can do ministry. We can do ministry when our cup is running over. And if it's not, then we need to not be doing ministry because um, what people need to be encountering when they get around us is an overflow of what's full inside of us. And so, it's really, I know that we can all train ourselves to fight all the way to church and then flip a switch and get out and be good old Christian people, but that's super unhealthy. And at the end of the day, you're just not who you're made to be. And so, yeah, you'd be better off to never reach your full potential in what you think is your calling, but have a family that loves you. And at the end of the day, I treat one of the things that helps me put those two, ministry and family, keep them in order is I'm thinking the greatest ministry I'll ever do is raise my kids to be better Christians than me. And then they can go on to be in ministry if they choose or raise their kids and you start to think more and more generationally and less about what can I accomplish because I started not to cast stones at anybody in particular, but I started studying some of the great men and women of the past in our Christendom history, and a lot of them it didn't really continue past them. A lot of them, their kids didn't care much for God or definitely not ministry, and it's because they got crushed and sacrificed and pushed aside, and they were abused and neglected while their parents reached greatness. So I started to look at that and say, maybe the greatest thing I could do for the world isn't hit my full potential in ministry. Maybe it's to do what I can do while stewarding my next generation. And it makes life a lot easier. It makes taking time with them a lot more, fulfilling. and purposeful, and I do like them. But and I'm a workaholic at the end of the day. So figuring out that I have a multi-generational call, like as we all do, it makes everything easier. And something I've shared with Adam before is it makes how we disciple people. It's one of the things we use to inspire people is yeah, maybe you had a rough life, maybe you had a rough past. Maybe this fight that we're going to push you into to deal with things with the Lord, maybe you don't come out smelling like roses in 2 seconds. Maybe you struggle the rest of your life to some degree, you still have a limp. But what if you fight it a well enough battle that your kids don't fight it? What if your grandkids don't even know it ever existed? And we start to push people to even to think about everything we do generationally. Meaning, like I've always been, and just going back to where we started, the work stuff. Somebody in my past, in my bloodline, they did the hard work. They fought through poverty. They were orphans in the Great Depression. They were migrant workers. It's hard to imagine that in my lifetime I was raised heavily impacted by people who were migrant workers because they were so poor. But then my parents fought a really hard fight, and they did the hard work. And then their children, they we don't really know what failure looks like because we're once removed from it. Um, and my kids probably will never know what my grandparents knew. And that's just the way the things of the Lord work, is that we all do the work. And that's why, jumping back, do the hard work, become a great worker, come home and tell stories about how you've got the best attitude and you're the fun guy and you keep morale up. Your kids are listening all the time. They're being shaped by everything you do and say. And so now you're blessing your employer, like the Bible said. You're being transformed, like we all know it would, and you're raising a whole nother generation to only know good work ethic. And it's just everything we do is multi-layered, multiple impacts, and that's why everything matters. I've said that till I'm blue in the face. Everything matters. You find anyone who you think they have some kind of anointing or calling on their life, but if you hang around them a little bit and you find that they have areas where they think they're beating a system, watch it. Just watch long enough. If anyone who thinks they can ever beat a system somewhere, it's going to get them, because everything matters. And ultimately we're looking for fruit. I don't know if you've ever farmed before, a lot of farm analogies in the Bible, but yeah, literally everything matters. The soil content matters, the moisture, the shade, everything,
Yeah.
everything matters. And so as we're growing into this kingdom on earth reality, what does it look like to be discipled by Jesus? Well, it looks like you're not always going to hear what you want to hear. As he preached a sermon one time and thinned the herd down to almost nothing and looked at the nothing that was left and said, "Don't you want to go too?" Because he needed people who wanted to hear the hard news and be willing to embrace that it was uncomfortable and
Mhm.
then move forward. We had somebody at church that Adam and I both know. I won't share their name and story, but they got up and testified one time, because we give testimonies every week. They got up and gave testimony. They said, "My boss pulled me in and gave me a really bad report and said I'm on a 90-day notice that if I don't tighten up, I'm losing my job." And they were like, "That hurt. That stings. But I'm here today to testify a future testimony that I'm going to do better." And they did. They tightened up. They let the Lord start really ministering in their heart, the areas of wounding and brokenness, and they fixed it. That's the amazing thing. If you're willing to hear the hard things and embrace it and take it to God, He can turn your life around so fast. It is ridiculous. I have people that with us that live these tremendously blessed lives.
Mhm.
Tremendous. If you met them today, you'd think they were third generation success. I found them in drug addiction. I found them in poverty. I found them in, but they were the small fraction of people who said, "Tell me what I need to do, and I'll do it to the fullest." And they did it, and inside of 3 to 5 years, I don't want to make promises for anybody listening, but in 3 to 5 years, you'd never know they existed like that. But you
Mm.
got to be willing to embrace the discomfort of what you're doing wrong and then fix it with Jesus.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think sometimes when we're trying to think generationally, or let me pull this back. We get stuck sometimes and can't get to generational thinking because we're so focused on the individual behavior in the moment, right? So if
Yeah.
someone messes up, like, "Oh, you messed up," and like, "How dare you mess up?" and "Why would you mess up?" and like, "That's bad." How did? And it's like all that may be true. I'm not denying that like the sin or behavior is unacceptable, but we're not rooting into the deeper reason of like, "Hey, this is really why you want to deal with this." Because if you don't,
Mm-hmm.
right, it's gonna show up in your marriage. I promise you, your marriage,
Yeah.
that ring will not stop things at the door that you had in your life. They will come with that ring, right? And then
Yeah.
if it's not stopped there and not fought against, it's going to show up with your kids. And by the time your grandkids come around, the standard is going to change. And that standard could be really, really dangerous left unchecked, generations removed.
Yeah.
And you're hoping that all your kids will have the encounter with God you had, but they won't. They'll have different ones. And you're hoping that your grandkids by chance would absolutely know, but they won't. And it's like, so unless you prioritize, like what are the what, because that's the other thing I think that's interesting in the seed analogy or the farming analogy, only a few seeds that get sent out actually take root and grow. So that means you're
Mm-hmm.
casting out lots of seed and a handful of them are going to grow and you don't know which ones. Like you don't,
Yeah.
you think I hope my kids will never catch my temper. I
Mm.
know that I've already seen some of it in my oldest son because he got me younger and I hadn't worked through some of that stuff yet. So guess what? When I see it flare up in him, I'm not like, oh, I'm like, no, I didn't disciple him well because I didn't deal with that. Now, if you get around my younger kids, they're not so hot-headed like that. Now they're still seeing some, but I'm because that's an area of something in me I have to keep working out. And I feel like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, we talk about ministry, and it's like, man, oh man, whether you can preach a sermon or not, like when you go home, like, are your kids happy you get home? Are they? Are
Yeah.
they? Do you know them? Do they know you? Like, is there? And it's like, no, I mean, you can preach, you can go up there and do a show, but that show doesn't. And I think that, I'll ask this question for you and maybe see where you go with it. But for me, one of the things that was the most profound about you, and I've said this to you before, and I'm not trying to like blow smoke, but this is honestly how I feel about Matt, guys, is that there was no mask. Like there's a church face that everybody does to some degree, right? Like, and it's sometimes just they call it a hospitable face. Like you realize you don't take your angry attitude to a stranger, right? That's just some maturity. But a lot of times it's
Yeah.
like it's every week church check mark, like boom, mask on, mask off. And I hung out with Matt pre and post a bunch, and there was nothing ever changed. Not his tone, not his language, not his how he talked about people, not how he interacted with people. If a homeless guy walked in before service, mid service, or post service, Matt was going to deal with them exactly the same. And I wonder if maybe some of that consistency and lack of mask wearing is because we don't actually focus on work and family, where it's really hard to do the mask game. Balls to your court. See what you do with that one.
Yeah. So I think without directly answering that, I would say that when I was young in the Lord and some of the older saints that would have come out of the latter rain, I guess, era of the 70s and stuff, um, I was around some people that they were real funny about not sharing all their business with everybody around them. And they kind of made these accusations that, how brutal church people were. And if you let everybody know your business, they'll rip you apart. Just don't tell my business, and they would misquote the left hand and right hand verses. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. And and I decided a long, long time ago because I was saved, radically saved from a horrific life, and there was lots of struggle and darkness. And I decided years ago, after hearing some of that talk for a while in the beginning, I said, I don't ever want to live a life where I have to hide my business. If my business needs to be hidden, I should probably change my business, is what I kind of came up with. And so I just decided I never want to live a life that I have to lie about, bend the truth, hide from anybody. I am who I am. I am what I am. If I've got to hide it, I need to change it. And I just did that long before I was in ministry. And so then that was just an easy again, it's back to the work of a discipleship. That was Jesus discipling me and just pushing my heart. And that's, but it's just, are you willing to do the work? And there were some things in my personality, in my young man personality, early salvation, that my intentions weren't evil. My intentions weren't, but I was like, oh, this doesn't translate well. This doesn't, people respond differently to this than I think they should. And I'm like, I got to fix that. Like you got to remember that the world around you will effectively, if you're not hiding and being manipulative and wearing a mask, the world around you will just tell you what's wrong with you. If you can embrace the discomfort of hearing what's wrong with you. You know what I mean? I've got a couple people in my life now that are brutally honest if you ask them a direct question. And I make a point to every now and then ask them very direct questions and let them cuddle me a little bit because I need to hear it, you know? And it's not that I'm really wrong, just like I asked a guy last night who's really technical in presentation and he's really honest. I said, "Hey, how am I doing in my sermon presentations?" And he'll pick it apart like technically. He would never do that without being prompted, but I've told him I want you to do it every now and then. He'll pick me apart and it pushes me to be better. But you got to be willing to embrace the discomfort and you can't be offended. And that's every area of life. And if you recognize that you have a mask, then start fixing your life because that mask ain't working.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder I wonder how much the mask is related to offense, or if there's a correlation between the two. In that, if I'm wearing a mask and you start to speak to me to try to take the mask off, I'm likely to get offended. I have found the people that
Yeah.
don't wear masks are rarely offended. They're just not. Like
Yeah.
you can just run into them with a Mack truck of opinion, and they're like, okay, well, okay, let me go pray about that. I'll circle the wagons and I'll get back to you. But the people with the mask on, when you go, hey, why are you doing that? They're like, how dare you? What you don't understand my intentions. You don't know my heart. Like, whoa, I just I just wanted to ask that one. I saw you do a behavior. Didn't make a lot of sense to me. I wanted to ask a question about it. And the way you're responding, it's is I think it's Shakespeare, thou doth protest too much. Like you're
Yeah.
making too much of an argument here to prove that there's not something a little bit out of line. Um, how do you handle the offended?
You know, I don't know. That's a tough crowd to handle. you know, I've heard some catchy slogans over the years that I've heard. I think maybe Dan Moeller. I don't know. Somebody says you can't offend a dead man, and that's the God's honest truth. We're all supposed to be dying to self. If you're offended, you got room to die. I promise you. There was this old evangelist that I used to encounter from time to time from Wales. His name was Arthur Burt. He used to travel with Smith Wigglesworth, and he was really old by the time I had encountered him, and he was just to the point. Like there was no beating around the bush. And his favorite sermon to preach was, "If you can be offended, you should be. You should be offended as if you're capable of being offended. That's a good thing because now you know what to work on. Basically, like." As Christians, there's no reason to be offended. One, if you'll just embrace the discomfort of what's offending you and what's wrong with you, why you get so offended, you'll actually fix it. And so I think the greatest misconception in the modern Western church is that we're supposed to just love everybody as they are, as they come, which is a true statement. But that's not the highest level of love. The highest level of love is embracing everybody as they come, but never leaving them where you find them. Everybody should be walking closer to God. The end of this prophecy that we call the Bible, the book of Revelation, right? The whole thing points to seven continents covered in saints who glow like Moses glowed because he was close to God, like Jesus glowed because he was the Son of God, like various saints. And throughout all of history, we have this record of people who glowed. Like, this is not just weird language in the Bible. This is a promise that literally there's going to be so many of those people at some point we don't even need the sun anymore. It says they light up a city. Well, I can promise you, you're never going to glow unless you do some work about what's wrong with you and embrace this discipleship process, whether it's you and Jesus directly, you know, this mentors, whatever, pastors, but you got to have somebody in your life who has full permission to do that. And don't ever assume that a pastor's doing that with you. I can be honest with you. If they're anything like me and the ones that I know, we beat around the bush a lot because we know that most people are scared rabbits. And the first thing you say that hurts a little bit, they're going to run. And we all play this game where we try to not do that as long as we can to build equity with them. So when something really matters, we can let it out gently. just make them, if you really want to get through this thing quick, if you want to save your children's children, rip that band-aid off, get in there with them, start doing whatever they're telling you to do, give them full permission to be honest. You know, nobody really wants to be the guy who gives you the hard news all the time. Nobody wants that. But if you let them do it, you get disciplers, mentors in your life, and you make them comfortable with you that you won't run, you will get there very fast. And that's the thing. You got to be willing to do the work. You got to be willing to get past your offense. If you are offended, you're in the wrong. As a you got to realize, I preached this last week. Paul wrote letters of hope while in the deepest, darkest dungeon that Rome had to offer. You know what I mean? I preached that Paul's body was in prison, but Paul's heart was not. We are overcomers of the human plight. That's offense and selfishness and all these other things. We're meant to be overcomers of self, not dwelling in this human plight that's an awful existence at the end of the day. We're supposed to be guiding lights, and you get there by doing the work.
Yeah. It I think it's interesting. There are in your life, you go through and you'll have different seasons where different people will get to speak into your life. And really, depending on how hungry you are, like that you can get a buffet of people that'll speak things and challenge you. And what I've found, and again, I'm maybe a glutton for punishment in this way, but there's such a place in me that goes, I want to get better. I want to get stronger. I want to get healthier. Now, for a long time, what that meant was I want to do better at ministry. And so I would follow people either that were speakers or prophetic or this, that, or the other, right? Because that I wanted to be better at that, and I wanted to be discipled. And right, and guess what? They gave me the books to read. They gave me the critiques of my sermons. They let me know about the prophetic. They gave right, and I wanted to do the stuff. And then I realized, like, oh, this is empty. As a thing, it's empty.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's fulfilling when other people encounter God through the thing. But the thing itself isn't the Lord, and it isn't fulfilling. You actually very quickly realize you're just a monkey on pulled out to do a dance and then put away. And when I started saying, okay, no, I don't want that. I want men to speak into my life. Remember the first guy was John Orn, right? John, I met him and he loved his wife well. He loved his kids well. And I said, man, I just want you to speak into my life about my wife and kids. And for a season, we were much closer. Lately, time's been tougher because of just kids and life and circumstance. But there was a season where, man, he was calling me and we were talking regularly about how I'm treating Lisa, how I'm treating the babies, how I'm like, what does that look like? Adam, are you serving her? Are you praying for her? And it was like, he didn't ask me about my sermons. He didn't even care. Didn't ask me my last prophecy, last miracle I saw. It was always, hey, how are you treating Lisa? And one of the things I began to realize that I started to realize, like, okay, I haven't arrived. That's the arrival is like the glowing one or death, right? So I realized there's this process, but I've been able to go back to my wife and ask, like, that's been the neatest thing, going to my wife and saying, hey, am I loving you better? And having my wife look at me and be like, I like our marriage. I'm happy. I feel fulfilled. It's like, whoa, that has weight. Prophesying over 300 people in a row, cool. Everyone's really impressed. Means nothing. I leave. Now, what the Lord does with them is everything. But it means there's nothing. I'm literally just a receptacle going, here you go, guys. But when it's like my little girl gets into my lap and tells me she loves me.
Yeah.
There it is. Or a boss says, hey, like when I had Nick a week ago say, hey, Adam, you're just doing a great job. Right? We're working together. But that's a senior, that's a father in the faith saying to a young man going, hey, I like how hard you are. And it was like, whew, there we go. Right? That's the weighty stuff. Not the how, what happened in my last traveling event. And I think if we can get guys and girls, that's not obviously gender neutral, we can get people to buy into like the weighty stuff. Then with the service, like, it's so amazing. The service starts flowing better automatically, right? People start working better. They serve better in the house of God. People start loving their family. They love strangers better. It's like, it just naturally leans into church life. Whereas if you do church life, it does not naturally lean into the other two.
Yeah.
The
Very true.
want to ask one last question, and then we'll bring it to a wrap. As it pertains to image bearing, so let's take this out and run it a little bit more towards maturity and not towards the introductory level of things. How does this, in your words, get us towards image bearing and the responsibility of what that actually means? Like essentially thinking the earth looking for these mature sons. The scriptures talk about they're looking for this maturity to come on. What is
Hmm.
how does that work for you as maybe the end of discipleship, or is it the end, or how would you unpack that?
Are you asking how it impacts the earth, or how it impacts the
The
discipleship
discipleship
process?
process and vice versa. How does this discipleship process lean into the dynamics of coming into identity or coming into image bearing? How do those two things correlate for
Yeah.
you? You see a better correlation?
Well, I think the maturing process of discipleship, and I heard somebody recently say, I can't remember who, but they said, basically, if you develop and mature and grow in Christ, and you have a really good mentor that's standing with you in that process, then at the end of it, you should ask yourself, what did they even do? Um, what was their role? Like towards the end, you start to even lose track of what they're doing. And it's because they should only be pushing you to do the work with God yourself. And I think the end result is, yeah, you should always have pastors in your life, and you should always have people who are covering you when you're down. But the end result isn't that you're more dependent on a mentor. The end result is you've become more like Jesus. Jesus didn't need a mentor, you know what I mean? He was Jesus. And so we grow and develop, and we see these apostles we read about and the saints of our past. You don't see them needing someone lording over them. But I'll just be honest with you, I think people get way too early. They get to that place like, yeah, I've been discipled, I'm good. No, you're not. you know um, the end of it is, to answer your question, you don't need that person anymore. If
Mm.
they were really good at their job, you will wonder what they did at all, because all they did was tell me to paint a fence like Mr. Miyagi, and then here they are taking some credit. Like nobody should be taking credit, but you know what I mean. But they pushed you to do the basic work, because I think the reality is that Jesus hid himself in all these things, and you'll find him in those things, and then he'll begin to be in you in all of these things, and it basically creates its own momentum, its own steam, and it just plows along. And at some point, you forget, you have no drive, no hunger to be a bad worker, to be a bad spouse, to be a bad. When you mess up, your first instinct is going to be, I got to fix this because this feels awful. I want to get back to where I was doing good. You don't need someone lording over you,
Yeah,
and so um, and a good mentor is never going to lord over you anyway. You're either going to do the work or not. They're going to tell you to go paint the fence, and they're going to, when you come and say, "Hey, I still don't know how to preach good," you're going to say, "How's that fence coming?" A good mentor is never going to do the work for you. And if you think it's laying on hands and in a special service, a special sermon or something, you're never going to get there. If you're willing to do the work, you'll get there, and you won't need them to do that for you long. The more you're willing to do the work, the less you need a mentor longer in your life. And then the impact we have is, you know, the world, anybody on this earth that was going to be won with a fear tactic message, they've been won. The people that are left are stubborn people. They need to see somebody show up to work that maybe you don't physically glow yet, but they need to see somebody show up at work that has the fruit of Jesus in their life, and
yeah,
it gains momentum. Not to brag, I wouldn't say this happened often, but I had people when I worked public jobs who they noted, they were like, yeah, it's when you're here, everything is smoother. Like they would make me come in on my sick days sometimes because things were going wrong, and they were like, we just need you to be here. And this was not a Christian company, but they started to notice that there's one person who can shift the atmosphere and the tone. They said the whole mood would change when I was there. I'm not bragging, but I'm just saying it is more possible than you think to carry these promises in your life, and it begins to shape the world around you.
mm,
So we have a job. We're turning this whole earth into the bride of Christ, and you do the work, and then your children, they walk in your victory. Their children walk in their victory, and honestly, a lot of people don't like my timelines, and I'm going to get a little off track here, but you know, we've come a long, long ways in 2,000 years. Like,
Yeah.
it, in 2,000 years since Christ, we are on 7 continents. Like, the underground churches in most places aren't even really underground anymore. Like, we're gaining traction like crazy. And
Mhm.
the idea that we would cover this earth completely in glory carrying saints, it's not that far off. So the question will be, now that we live in this free country in this free time and we're not persecuted for being Christian, the question won't be were you Christian or not? It's what did you do with your freedom? What did you do with your life? Nobody was going to cut your head off for being awesome for Jesus at work. It's not about handing out tracts in the bathroom. It's about, can you carry the integrity of Jesus to the point that it shifts an atmosphere and people want to know what's different in your life? That's what's going to change this world. And at the end of it all, that's what he's going to ask us. What did you do growing up in freedom?
Mm. Wow. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let that mic drop as the exclamation point. What did you do in
Yeah.
freedom? It's been about 40 minutes, so I'm going to close this out in prayer. Matt, thank you. I know we had some
Yeah.
technical stuff, but it was really good. I know that people are going to come
Great.
back and really
I like
enjoy
to
it.
start a new conversation right at the end, you know?
So, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Let's just close out in prayer. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for the conversation. I ask that it would be fruitful as we talked about seed and soil, that people that listen would be challenged and that they would grow. Lord, thank you for Matt and his life. We bless him in Jesus' name. Amen. Guys, take care. God bless.
Amen.